Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sorin Space. Today, I want to speak about existence, not only about life and not only about death. I want to speak about a framework that includes death without placing it at the center. This is not a talk about fear. It is not a talk about meaning. And it is not a talk about how to face death. It is a talk about observation, about continuity, and about why death appears the way it does to us. My central claim is simple. Death is not a special event in the universe. It is a macroscopic label applied by a limited observer to a continuous process. To understand this, we must begin with how observation works. As observers, we do not perceive reality in full. We perceive slices. Our bodies exist in 3 dimensions. Our senses operate within narrow ranges. Our perception is bound by both dimension and resolution. Because of this, we experience the universe as a sequence of moments, each labeled and separated. But this separation does not exist in the same way at larger or finer scales. A lower dimensional observer cannot perceive a higher dimensional structure in full. A 2-dimensional point moving on a plane cannot see the countless 2-dimensional slices of a 3-dimensional object. Those slices either appear as lower dimensional projections or do not appear at all. In the same way, a 3-dimensional observer can only access a limited slice of a higher dimensional reality. This is the first limit. The second limit is scale. At the macroscopic level, we define life and death using observable patterns: breathing, heartbeat, movement, responsiveness. When these patterns stop, we apply the label that we call death. But these are not fundamental states of reality. They are summaries. At the microscopic level, the system we call a living body never stops changing. Atoms decay, molecules rearrange, energy redistributes, interactions continue. There is no single instant at which life suddenly becomes death at the fundamental level. What exists instead is a continuous process that gradually leaves the narrow range we classify as life. Life and death, as we use those words, are coarse-grained labels applied to a much finer process. This is why death feels absolute to us, not because it is absolute in reality, but because our observation is limited. We observe at a scale where only large patterns are visible. We use time labels with relatively coarse resolution, and we rely on biological indicators that summarize complex dynamics into simple categories. From a broader perspective, the process does not disappear. It continues. What changes is the observer's ability to interact with it in familiar ways. This same logic applies to our own existence. From within life, death appears as a boundary. From a larger view, it is a transition within continuity. The universe does not require a sharp division between being and non-being. It only requires change. Time itself, as we experience it, is part of this limitation. Time is not necessarily a substance flowing through reality. It is an indexing system used by observers to order change. We place labels such as before and after, alive and dead, based on how we access the process. At larger scales, entire lifetimes can be treated as single structures. At finer scales, what we call a moment contains countless changes we cannot resolve. Death, in this sense, is not an endpoint in the universe. It is an endpoint of a particular observational mode. It marks the point where a specific pattern can no longer be tracked by a living observer from within the same slice. This does not make death trivial, and it does not make life meaningless. It simply places both within a continuous structure that does not revolve around our labels. To include death is not to deny its significance. It is to stop treating it as a metaphysical exception. When we include death within continuity, we remove the illusion that reality must break for death to occur. Nothing breaks. Patterns change. Access ends. Slices move on. What we call loss is the loss of perspective, not the loss of existence itself. This framework does not claim to explain consciousness. It does not promise comfort, and it does not replace science. What it offers is clarity. It reminds us that our experience of life and death is shaped by how we observe, not by how reality must be. If the universe is larger than our interface, then life and death are not opposites. They are labels within a process that does not pause to announce its transitions. To include death is not to dwell on it. It is to place it where it belongs, inside continuity, inside observation, inside the limits of what we can perceive. Thank you.